Good evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As you know, it's just after 8:30 here in the United Kingdom, and we're coming to you live from the studios of British Muslim TV here in Wakefield with this week's edition of Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq. Now, we're broadcasting on Sky Channel 752 and across social media at the handle British Muslim TV. Wherever you are joining us from around the world, a very warm welcome. Now, we want you to comment on the big stories we're covering tonight. Call us now on 01924 231083. Messages on the WhatsApp number, which is on the screen now. And if you're watching this on Facebook, post your comments in the chat box and we'll read some of them on air later. Tonight, first, we'll reflect on the life of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, whose state funeral was held on Monday at Westminster Abbey. It saw over 500 world leaders, royalty and government officials join family and friends to attend and pay respect to the late Queen. Iqbal Bana, who is West Yorkshire's Deputy Lord Lieutenant, and leading British Imam and leader and Deputy Lord Lieutenant for Nottinghamshire, Dr. Musharraf Hussain will be with us. They'll be reflecting on the Queen's life and what we can expect from the new King, King Charles III. We then head to London to talk to the journalist and broadcaster Tam Hussain about his latest novel titled The Darkness Inside. And then we just go up the road here in Wakefield to talk to Mahmoud Nawaz. He's a non-executive director for Mid Yorkshire NHS. About Organ Donation Week, which begins next week on Monday the 26th. It's been brought forward a week due to the death of the Queen. Now, we want to hear from you tonight. Call us now on 01924 231083. Messages on British Muslim TV across social media. Alternatively, you can send us a WhatsApp message. The number is on the screen. The questions we're considering tonight: how will you remember the Queen? Are writers of colour recognised and celebrated in the publishing industry? And how important is it for organ donation to be promoted amongst ethnic minority communities? Again, share your thoughts. The number, the WhatsApp number, and your social media ability is all on the screen, and we'll read some of the comments out throughout the program. Okay, let's get started on the program. Now, the world paused at 11 a.m. on Monday when the body of Queen Elizabeth II was brought from Westminster Hall, where it's been lying in state, to Westminster Abbey for a state funeral. Joining the King Charles III, the Prince of Wales, members of the royal family, were presidents, kings, queens, prime ministers and leaders of the world who came in their dozens to mark the passing of an extraordinary personality whose reign lasted 70 years. Alongside the great and good were members of the public who'd previously been honoured for their extraordinary contribution to society. Let us reflect now on the death of Her Majesty Queen with the Deputy Lord Lieutenant of West Yorkshire, Iqbal Bana, leading British Imam and scholar Sheikh Dr. Musharraf Hussain, who is also a Deputy Lord Lieutenant in Nottinghamshire. I'm pleased to say Iqbal is joining us live from just up the road here just up the road from here in Wakefield is a beautiful place called Batley, and Dr. Musharraf Hussain joins us from the city of Nottingham. Gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. A very warm welcome to the programme. Great to have this conversation.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, Shafiq. Really delighted to see you after a long time.
Likewise, sir. Iqbal, let's start with you. You've met the Queen on many occasions. What are your reflections about the passing of Her Majesty the Queen?
I met her on one occasion when I was fortunate to be at the garden party a few years ago. I have been involved with Her Majesty's couple of visits, but not actually had the opportunity to meet her before that. I found her a person of real warmth, a person who wanted to make you feel comfortable, and you felt that there was no airs and graces with her. Whenever you had the opportunity to get close to her and talk to her, she seemed, despite her status, that she made you feel really warm and welcomed in her presence. And it was surprising that she was very knowledgeable about a lot of the people that she met. She really did do her sort of research well, or whoever briefed her did their research really well. And I think over the years we've learned that Her Majesty herself, the Queen, the late Queen, realized that as the world was changing, the community was changing, the United Kingdom was changing, that the country had to change. And to a certain extent, she was in a way, the leading light of bringing about change in this country as well. I mean, in the 60s, you could see her opening the royalty and the royal members of the royal family to other communities, which had not happened before. And by going to members of the Commonwealth countries, she was actually shining a light on some of the other countries which are part of the wider Commonwealth, who had very different cultures, faiths, and institutions. So she was breaking the mold in the 60s and the 70s. And as we progress in the 80s and 90s, for example, deputy lieutenants, as I am and Dr. Sabi, until about 15, 20 years ago, ordinary people, maybe Dr. Sabi is not an ordinary person, he's an alim, mashallah, and a doctor, didn't get a look in. But over the last 15, 20 years, that also changed. That, she wanted ordinary people to be part of this institution. So I found her to be a real person. She had a lot of humanity in her as well.
Mm. Dr. Musharraf Hussain, how do you reflect on the 70 years of service of the late Queen?
I think she's a person who truly dedicated herself to serving her people. And I think that's what makes her so special, that for 70 years, she really did serve her people. She gave everything that she had. And I think with great dignity and with wisdom. And, one just needs to listen to some of the British prime ministers, what they have been saying, how much they would, gain when they would have their weekly audiences with the Queen. And I think she was a great treasury of traditional wisdom and foresight. And I think British people are going to be missing something amazing.
Yeah, that's so true. Iqbal, we've seen the nation come together to mourn the Queen. What has the reaction been like in West Yorkshire?
I think throughout the country and probably throughout the world, people have so mourned her loss. Because as I say, she was sort of unique in the way the royalty sort of interacted with communities. And I remember one of her most famous words was, as part of the Commonwealth, she was saying that diversity is a strength and not a threat. And I think this was a message she was sending to the people, not just in this country, but across the world as well, that we should celebrate diversity. We should champion diversity, because by celebrating and championing diversity, we actually become more inclusive and more aware of each other's sort of differences. And those differences are there to help us to understand each other better and build more better relationships with each other as well. And I agree with my learned colleague, Dr. Musharraf Sahab. I mean, 70 years of undivided, sort of totally dedicated, committed service to the public is totally unprecedented. And that in itself shows that, this was a unique person who was more interested in others than she was in herself. And her warmth, as I said, was palpable. We could see from her the way she interacted with people. I think one of the most abiding memory I will have is many, many years ago, some people may remember this story, a leader from a developing country came at a state engagement, and at the dinner table, the state dinner, they had put finger bowls, for people to dip their fingers in with hot water and lemon to clean their fingers before they started to eat. Unaware of this fact, the gentleman concerned, it was a man, was the president of that country, picked up the finger bowl and started to drink it, thinking that it was something that he had to do before the meal started. Her Majesty witnessed that. And she realized that there were others who were looking at this gentleman. And in order to not to embarrass him, she actually picked up the bowl and also drank from it. And to me, that is a real strength of the person, who shows how caring she was to others. Whereas others were making mockery of that gentleman, she actually made him feel much more at ease.
Yeah, I think you can, really powerful story there, makes you chuckle about that. Dr. Musharraf, there's been lots of conversations, lots of criticism of public figures. How do you think Muslims should react and reflect on the death of the Queen?
Okay, I think there are some basic theological points that we should remember when we are mourning and presenting condolences to our non-Muslim friends, neighbors, and dignitaries. First of all, it's the Quran makes it absolutely clear that we do not do dua al-maghfirah. We do not pray for the forgiveness or pray for Allah to bless them. Okay, that is totally wrong. It's something that's forbidden. We do not make dua of that kind. We don't do al-Fatiha either. And we don't associate them with Jannah either. I think that it's really important to bear that theology in mind. And I'll tell you, the Christians would dislike that as well. If we are to, and if a non-Muslim made prayers for us, I think many of us would not accept that either, because, our faith and our belief is very different. Therefore, so there is no compromise on that, okay? And that's quite normal, okay? I think that's very important. However, we must pay condolences. What does condolences mean? I think some of our people actually don't, because it's poor English, they don't understand. Condolences is really simply showing sympathy and saying that, look, we feel sorry. We want to share your sorrow and sadness.
Yeah.
That
so
is
the human,
any human being can do.
I just wanted to ask you about that.
Muslims
Dr. Musharraf,
against that.
Yeah, let me ask you about that. So it's about showing condolences, love, solidarity, support as a human being. Is there anything, we've got about a minute before the break, but is there anything in the life of the Prophet ﷺ that allows us to do that?
Lots, alhamdulillah. The Prophet ﷺ was rahmatan lil alameen. You know what that means? Kindness for all the people, all the communities, all kinds of human beings, not lil mu'mineen, not just for the believers. All right. So that is absolute. And we know, there are dozens of amazing, stories of the Prophet's kindness to non-Muslims.
Yeah, well, do you know what?
It's really very important part of our rules.
Okay, well, we're going to continue reflecting on the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her state funeral. And what now? After the break, we'll talk about the future and the reign of King Charles III. You're watching British Muslim TV with me, Mohammed Shafiq. It's time for a break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. We'll be back after these very important but short messages. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV, live from our studios in Wakefield. Now, we're on air in this segment, remembering Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth after her said death and her state funeral only a couple of days ago. If you want to share your thoughts, 01924 231 083, get in touch with us on social media handles, British Muslim TV. We're having an exclusive conversation with Iqbal Bana and Dr. Musharraf Hussain about their reflections on the death of the Queen. And Dr. Musharraf was talking about the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam as an example, as a rahmah for the whole of humanity. Iqbal Bana, what do you make of the response of the British Muslim community these past 11, 12 days?
I think, as Dr. Saab said, people have been confused as to what their response should be of being a Muslim. And I think the Dr. Saab is totally correct. In Islam, there are certain rules and regulations that we have to follow. But one of the most fundamental principles that the Prophet ﷺ taught us is have respect and value humanity, regardless of what color, creed, faith there may be. At the end of the day, our fellow human beings are also part of our world. And therefore, when they suffer a loss, we should reflect, on that loss that they have suffered and give them as much support and sympathy as we can. And therefore, any Muslim who says that we shouldn't be doing that, in my opinion, a humble opinion, and I'm not an alim, not a scholar, I think as a human being, we do need to make sure that, we do reflect that loss that they have suffered. And we give, we pray Allah gives them strength, those who are still behind, and give them the light and the right way, the path as well. So I personally, as a Deputy Lieutenant, I'm sure my colleague Dr. Musharraf as well may have attended a number of services in order to show our support for the departed Queen and also for the new King, to make sure that, we feel that, we are part of this country.
Yeah.
we are part of the establishment. We're part of the fabric of society.
I think that's really important, and we'll talk about King Charles III in a second. But let me just ask you one more before I go to Dr. Musharraf. Is it appropriate for the national anthem to be sung in mosques, as we saw?
Well,
because that's one of the criticisms that's been asked.
Yes, I certainly would not be happy with singing it in the mosque. No way. I think that's the masjid is something very special, very unique place where we worship Allah, and it's a very special. I would not sing the national anthem certainly in the masjid, outside masjid, in the hall, in a room, anywhere. The national anthem is really a sign of our solidarity. It doesn't have actually anything that is in its words that really contravenes our Islamic values.
So when it says "God save the King," how can?
Yes, that's a very nice prayer actually. God save the King, which is a prayer that saving means many things. Save could mean obviously protect. It means save him from doing wrong things. Give him the wisdom, okay? Save him from the wrong path, okay? So that's actually it's a very good prayer that we should always be doing for non-Muslim friends anyway. God save you from the wrong path. God guide you. God give you health. God give you this. Particularly, when we are asking Allah to guide, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, used to make a prayer. He used to say, Ya Allah, make one of the two Umars a believer. And he was referring to Abu Jahl's name was Umar as well, and Sayyidina Umar Farooq. They were not Muslims then. He said, I used to pray. So, prayer, obviously, the Prophet would have made many prayers for many people to be guided, okay? So, yes, we should be praying for our non-Muslims so that Allah guide them, Allah protect them from shaitan, Allah protect them from being misled and from temptations, really. So, yes, that prayer is actually quite a safe, theologically, you can't, say that that's a wrong prayer.
Okay. Iqbal Bana, we know that the Queen, she made that pledge when she was 21 in South Africa to give her whole life in service of the country, the imperial family, she said, which turned out to be the Commonwealth. Shahid Latif is asking on Facebook, would the Pakistani community or the British Muslim community be here if it wasn't for the Queen and the links to the Commonwealth?
Well, I'm not sure whether there's a direct correlation between the Queen and us being here. I remember many years ago when we had the disturbances, as I call them, the civil disturbances in the 80s. A very elderly Pakistani gentleman who actually came here immediately after the war in Newport in South Wales. He was asked a question by a reporter saying, "Sir, can I ask you, why are you here?" And his answer, I sort of basically embedded in my head. His answer was very simple. He says, "I am here because you were there." Now we have this very sort of strategic relationship, intrinsic relationship between the Asian subcontinent and the United Kingdom, and it's inevitable. And when you look at migration, wherever people move from one place to another, where they have some connections and connectivity and some knowledge and history, that's where people tend to congregate. And that's why, whether it was Her Majesty the Queen or whether somebody else, I think there would have always been this sort of automatic assimilation or not assimilation, connection between the Asian subcontinent and the UK. Remember, back then in the Asian subcontinent, Queen Victoria was known as Malika Victoria. And to a certain extent, Queen Elizabeth II was known like that. So there is this very strong, historic bond between the continents there. So I think whoever had been here, we would have, people from the Asian subcontinent would have been here anyway. But I think I go back to Her Majesty's sort of 70 years of service and dedication. And we talked about how she's brought people together, the Commonwealth together. And even in death, we could see very clearly people from all walks of lives, people of faith, people of no faith, people from all colors and creeds wanted to be there to show their respect. Whether they believed, whether they were monarchist or royalist or whatever they may be, a Republican, even the Prime Minister of Australia, who has made it publicly clear that he would like to see Australia so extricate itself from the Queen or the head of state from this country to become a republic, even he came over, and although he was asked a number of times, do you still believe in republicanism? He says, look, this is not the time to ask that question.
As did the New
This is the
Zealand
time to mourn.
Yeah, the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern,
Yeah,
she said something similar.
Yeah.
And that moves on to the next question, I suppose, Dr. Musharraf. How do you, King Charles III is now our monarch, and he has a very good relationship with Muslims. I've had the honor of meeting him on many occasions, and he has this deep knowledge about Sufism, about Islam, about Islamic finance, and he is very keen to defend the faith of Islam. How do you assess his reign is going to be like in the years to come?
I've had opportunity to meet, then he was Prince Charles, several times actually. I was on the committee that went to Indonesia when he did a tour of it, and we were with him for a few days. I gave him one of my books actually, 7 Steps to Spiritual Intelligence. And we had a good conversation about it because he's very interested in spirituality. And his very famous speech on Muslims and ending this binary sort of dislike and liking and loathing of each other, in the 1993 speech of his, is very famous one. And he showed very deep affection for Islamic civilization and the good understanding of the history of Islamic civilization as well. I think, we should really value friends like that. And we need more friends like that, who will, inshallah, appreciate. And we pray, that Allah is the turner of hearts, okay? And bless them. But the biggest thing we can expect and do is really make friends with people of this nature, so that they can support our community. We need friends in this country, to be honest. And I think one thing that comes out very clearly, and the British have shown, is how united they are when it comes to national matters. And how, and this is a sign of really a good civilization, of people who are united, and people who are, willing to flourish and rise. I think so. There's lots to learn there. And, death is a time when we don't look at people's weaknesses, or where they come from, or the Prophet ﷺ forbade that. He said, don't look at the negative sides. You always look at the positive sides. Of those who have died.
Yeah, Dr. Musharraf, thank you so much. Iqbal Banan, let me give you the last question. We've got a couple of minutes. How do you assess King Charles III reign as he embarks? I mean, what's been extraordinary for me is that he's been mourning the loss of his mother, and yet has had to do all these state duties over these past 48 hours, let's say. 2 weeks or so, and he's had to do that in the glare of the public arena. How do you assess how he's going to be as king?
I totally agree with Dr. Musharraf, my learned colleague, that in fact I made a speech the other day that possibly, and this is a reflection on me, that King Charles III probably has better knowledge of Islam than I do.
So true.
Because he is really, really interested, and I think he's deeply researched Islam. And I think he understands the true Islamic faith better than, unfortunately, a lot of our born Muslims as well. And I think that in itself stands us in a good stead. I was supposed to meet him in the next 2 weeks, actually. I was supposed to go and see him in Scotland. Obviously, that is now changed. I think, as Dr. Saab says, we, the Muslim community in this country, need to now really understand that we need to build lots of strong bridges between ourselves and other faith communities as well.
Yeah,
I think some communities have really sort of enclosed themselves in a bubble, thinking that they don't need any friends. Allah is the only friend they need, which is true. But in a community, in a society where we live together side by side, building relationships, being good to our neighbors, being concerned for our neighbors, whoever they may be, whatever faith or no faith they may be, is equally as important as everything else.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think King Charles III, having the knowledge of Islam and having this very strong connectivity with people like Dr. Musharraf himself, I'm sure will be a huge asset. And let me just say, when the new Prince of Wales came to Bradford in
Sorry, Iqbal, we've run out of time. We're about 20 seconds before a break, but we'll come back, and I'm sure when we have the coronation of King Charles III, we'll be able to reflect. Thank you so much, Iqbal Bana and Dr. Musharraf Hussain, joining us live from Bartley and Nottingham. We'll take a break, then we head to London and talk to the journalist and author Tam Hussain. Don't be going anywhere. We'll be waiting for you. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq. I don't know if you caught me having a sip of water, but if you did, you all know why we do that. So anyway, welcome to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV. Great thanks to Iqbal Bana, who's the Deputy Lord Lieutenant of West Yorkshire, and which is a Queen's representative, Deputy Representative in the counties. And Dr. Musharraf is also for Nottinghamshire. And they basically, their job is to welcome members of the royal family when they come to your county, and they're responsible for making sure that everything is done in a proper sense when members of the royal family come. And so, yeah, it was great to get their thoughts. And as I said, if you want to continue to share your thoughts on the death of the Queen and what that means for the nation, and one of the things which people are asking about on Twitter and on Facebook is in regards to the comment about Dr. Musharraf saying the whole nation being united. I think the whole nation was, lots of you asking, is that really true? I think the whole nation was united in the sense of grief and solidarity for somebody who was a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, and that it didn't matter whether you were a Republican, you were in favour of the monarchy, whether you wanted an elected head of state. There was that sense that it was in the end of an era, it was history in the making, and that people said it was respectful for us to allow the space for people who wanted to mourn, who wanted to show solidarity with their royal family to do that. But that doesn't negate the fact that there was lots of people, and lots of you at home, we had it last week with one of the callers, lots of people who don't support the royal family, who do think about the institution of the monarchy and their links back to colonialism and the impact that colonialism had on countries around the world. And it's a legitimate criticism and question for people to have. And that's why we always give you the opportunity to express your viewpoint here on British Muslim TV, because the British Muslim community home is British Muslim TV. 01924 231083. And so if you want to share your thoughts, you can also get in touch with us on a WhatsApp number and on social media. We'll get through some of your comments later on. As I said, now, how supportive and successful can people be from diverse communities in getting publishing houses to publish books from ethnic minorities? My next guest is an award-winning investigative journalist who not only got his books published, but has been recognised and celebrated for it around the world. He's reported on crime, foreign fighters, traffickers, and jihadist networks. He wrote a book who has reported on the he's written a book where he's reported on the jihadist networks, foreign fighters, and trafficking and crime. He's collaborated with a film director. My screen has just suddenly changed. Okay, so he's collaborated with the film director Peter Komensky on a 4-party drama series called The State. Do you remember about that? That was about young ISIS recruits from Britain. And he was shortlisted for the Orwell Orwell Prize for Journalism. He's an associate editor at the New Lines magazine, and he's a specialist producer for ITV News. And now his most recent book is titled The Darkness Inside. Now, Tam Hussain is recognised as an exceptional talent who is normally found behind the camera. But tonight, after much persuasion, he's given British Muslim TV the honour of an exclusive interview and joins us live from London. Tam, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the programme. Great to have you on.
Wa alaikum salam. I think You've been very kind with your words. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, certainly, I know I've been trying to coerce you in having this conversation for a while. So I'm super excited that we're doing this. First of all, tell us, where does the interest in writing and being a journalist come from?
I think, as you know, a lot of South Asian communities, they want you to be lawyers, accountants, and engineers, and so on and so forth. That's probably typical. But I came from a family, especially my mum, who's very, very into, literature and poetry and so on and so forth. So although I started off at a law degree, when I switched to an arts degree, history, I didn't face that much opposition. It was kind of understood. I know that when I was around 16, 17, my mum had read a book, or had read an article where they said that TV is kind of has a negative impact on you. I'm not saying, of course, unless it's British Muslim TV, so my mum got rid of the TV, and it just began a life of reading. I just began reading everything, and because we have time on our hands, and as a result, that's when it started really. And at university, as I was doing history, I discovered that fiction was the way to really understand many of these periods. I remember studying the French Revolution and then reading kind of War and Peace, and realizing, wow, this brings it to life much more than the texts. So this is really how I got into it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You've written lots and sometimes difficult topics for Muslims. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But where did the idea for this particular novel, the novel title, as it says, Darkness Inside, where did the idea for the novel come from?
So it was, look, I've been wrestling because I wrote a fiction book, non-fiction book called Look to the Mountains. Now that dealt with kind of Afghanistan. Of course, I covered the Syrian conflict. I lived in Syria for a long time. So Syria was very, very close to me. So seeing these foreign fighters going in, I wanted to document that too, because I'd covered it inside Syria during the conflict. But, for many, one of those reasons, it became very, very difficult to do that because of a lot of the anti-terror laws that was in place at the time. Because I'd approach a publisher and say, look, I want to tell the story of these foreign fighters. But they would shy away from it because they didn't want a production order saying, look, we need this material. Now, I'm not saying that this is something that the police would do lightly, but that was always kind of that risk. So so how do you tell that story? How do you tell that story? In such a contentious period as well. Jihadists weren't exactly to write about their human stories when you were seeing these on TV was very, very difficult. So then I started to think about it in terms of fiction. How do I turn that into fiction? And it really came about while I was working with Peter Kuzminski as a director. I was working on The State. It was on Channel 4, doing a lot of kind of like the legwork and the research for that. When I thought, okay, look, I got an idea about turning it into a screenplay initially. By chance, Riz Ahmed had also got in touch and said, listen, do you do screenplays? And so that kind of gave me that encouragement to carry on writing it through. And then when I sat, and then once I'd punched out a 3-part draft, I'd approached a production company. But, Riz Ahmed's advice was good. Look, you have to be aware that some of these things, aren't necessarily sometimes made for TV, because this production guy was like, look, what if Jihadi John comes back? That's the sort of story that we want to do. And I was like, look, that wouldn't work. That's not authentic. That's not real. I don't know what was going on inside his head, but he had this conception about these foreign fighters, and they were comic book characters. So that's when I thought, okay, let me turn this into a novel, right? This screenplay that I wanted for the TV, I thought, let me turn this into a novel. And that's what I did, exploring all of those ideas, which you can do in literature in the way that sometimes you can't do with film, and so on. So that's how it started. And the title itself, it was about the darkness within all of us, you know, within all of us.
Yeah.
You know.
And what's the narrative without giving the story away? We want people to buy the book. We want people to read it. But what's the storyline?
So the story, ostensibly, you've got London background. I'm from London. You know, it's set in Sadiq Khan's London, right? And you know, in Sadiq Khan's London, where we have a lot of knife crime. I work. I do a lot of voluntary work with people mixed up with in knife crime. So it starts off with a killing of this young man in Croydon called Anis. And this journalist decides to kind of investigate that in order to really use that as a vehicle to, you know, expose kind of the failures of, you know, of the mayor. But as he does so, it turns out that this death has got nothing to do with with knife crime in London, but it goes back to Syria and the politics that happened there amongst foreign fighters, and that's of course based on interviews and archive work and a lot of the work that I've done. So what you're getting is kind of a story based on a lot of real things that were going on. Yeah, if that makes sense.
No, it does really make sense. We've got about 3 minutes before the break, and I just want to ask you, it's very difficult, as you said, for the likes of, you know, Tam Hussein or Riz Ahmed to break into the mainstream media and get their books published. How has your experience been?
So look, you have to, I mean, for all writers, you have to, it is a struggle. Unfortunately, sometimes, you know, probably the least diverse is probably the publishing industry in many ways. You know, they talk about it, but they do want, it's almost like they envisage that only, you know, 35 to 40-year-old Mumsnet readers, if you will, you know, are going to read this, and they don't, and there isn't an appetite for other readers or people from out. You know, okay, so it's not just a white middle-class lady that will read it. You know, that's kind of, sometimes I have this idea, and I'd like to challenge that by saying that, look, there are readers outside of that, and sometimes, you know, the publishing industry doesn't necessarily recognize that, and they compartmentalize you into, you know, kind of niche places that they think you'll fit in, and that is an issue. But, you know, we've seen a great democratization of publishing. So, you know, if you want to get your work out there, you can, and I think that the publishing industry will respond to that as well. And again, that's why there's almost, I always take this lesson from Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was trying to break into Hollywood for a long time, and then realized, okay, Hollywood's not letting me in. So he went to Hong Kong. I think he did one of these great Bruce Lee flicks that got picked up by Hollywood, and Hollywood came knocking. So there are ways of going around it, and I always take lessons from that. You know, there are challenges as always, but, you know, you just have to punch through. That's the whole point. Yeah,
well, I know, I'm having a really fascinating conversation with you, Tam. I know you're going to stay with us. We're going to take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation with our special guest, Tam Hussein, the writer and journalist, joining us live from London. If you want to share your thoughts, if you've got any questions, 01924231083, but also get in touch with us on social media. The handle is British Muslim TV. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're broadcasting live. I'm Mohammed Shafiq. This is Questions, exclusively here on British Muslim TV. Time for a very quick break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. Don't be going anywhere. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq. We've got an exclusive conversation with Tam Hussein, the writer and journalist. And I just thought I'd remind you, next week is a very special occasion. Next week we celebrate our 100th episode. Wow. Who would have thought 2 years ago when we started this journey together here on British Muslim TV that I'd be presenting a 100th programme. So next week we'll be celebrating that. If you've got any ideas how we can celebrate that, please do get in touch. Tam, we were talking just before the break and during the break about the challenges that one faces. You've written about terrorist networks. You've written about some very difficult conversations, and you know you can attract undue attention. How do you protect yourself and your family and your work from those people who want to cause you harm?
To be honest with you, there is very little one can do. There are some things you think to yourself, okay, when you go into a cafe, you make sure your back's turned and so on and so forth. That you can see people coming in and out. I usually, if I've got certain people, let's say if it's because I've done some work on Albanian gangs. If I've got an Albanian guy that I don't know who wants to add me as a friend, I'm probably not going to accept him, simply because I think to myself he might be that way. Self-defense as well. I do that, but ultimately, you just have to trust in God, as it were. Leave it to God, because what's going to happen is going to happen. And that's I suppose is the way I do it. I also believe, though, that deception is not the way. So whatever, with a lot of these groups, I'm quite straight up with them. So people, I'm not going to deceive to get an interview. That's not what it's about. So they know what they're going to get with regards to interviews. So in that way, integrity I think is key. So I'm not going to pretend to say I'm going to do one thing and then do other. I'm going to try to deliver on what I've said, and that at least protects me in terms of integrity. And then if they don't like the interview, there's nothing I can do about it. But I've set out what I was going to do from the very beginning, and that's the way to protect myself, I suppose.
Yeah, that's really good. Now, The Darkness Inside is the title of the book. It's been published. What's the reaction been? What's the reviews been like?
Look, there's been, from the readers, it's been good. I've been really happy with it. There's been, from other people, from celebrity, whatever. Again, they've read it, they've loved it. I'm not just saying that. You by all means, tested it. Before I wrote it, I did test it out on my favorite readers, which includes my son, who's an avid reader. And when he got into it, I was like, yes. And he said he likened it to a favorite book of his, which is called Stone Cold. And when he said, Dad, it's like Stone Cold, I thought, that's it. I know I'm onto it. So far, people, you go onto the Amazon, look at the reviews, they seem to be very positive about it. So I'm happy. And I'm willing. I've said this when people have said, I'm willing to put my money on this, that it's a great read. I know that. I'm as confident as Muhammad Ali, when it comes down to this.
Yeah, and what's been extraordinary for people from within our communities, you were shortlisted for the Orwell Prize for several articles. One of them was titled "The Facade of the Afghan Jihad." Yeah. Tell us, what were you trying to argue in the article? So,
I feel that within our community, within the Muslim community, so of course there are narratives that are built about the Afghan war on kind of outside of the community, the war on terror and so on. Those are narratives that have been built up, but often than not, and I found this actually in Syria when I was sitting down with some of these foreign fighters, where they had in their own heads, they had their own narratives, and those narratives were not necessarily historically accurate. It was almost as if it began the Mujahideen, the Afghan Mujahideen, had started in the late 70s, right, and continued on up until 2003 when the Americans invaded and so on. But of course there are these periods within the Afghan period from 1992, the Soviets were expelled. Then you had this period. Then you had this civil war. Then you had the Taliban come and so on and so forth. All of those things were forgotten. So you might get a guy who'd gone to Afghanistan in, let's say, late 1999 and said, and he comes back and they think he's an Afghan war veteran. Well, he's not. He didn't. There was no, jihad, as it were, then. So what exactly, what was it about, if that makes sense? But because there are these myths going on within our community, that distinction isn't made. Now, one of those stark things that were illustrated for me was when I came across a foreign fighter who told me, who I was told was an Afghan war veteran. It was like, he fought in Afghan jihad, against the Soviets. But it turns out that he hadn't fought against the Soviets. He had a bookshop in Peshawar, right? But these myths had been built up within. And
there's no way to verify that, is there?
Well, the fact of exactly, but the fact of the matter is I could verify because I'd written a book, and then these people have told me that this person had to run a bookshop. So the point was, because we don't do these things, we build up these stories, and that can actually be harmful. And the people that pay the price in this case are actually Afghans and Syrians, because they have their own causes or whatever, and we go in there thinking, oh, we know what's going on, and we mess it up in a way sometimes, because we have our own agendas. If you look at, for example, just as an example, the issues that are going on in Leicester, these are very complex issues. Let's say people come in, demagogues are coming from outside, and they put on their own agendas there, and then you complicate things. You might actually make things worse, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Right?
Yeah. That's one of the key, if you like, stories of what's happening in Leicester. We'll be covering it next week here on British Muslim TV as well. Right. So the book's out. People can share their thoughts if you want as well. What advice can you give to young Muslims who are watching this, who want to get into journalism and writing? Ilyas is texting us from, where are you, Ilyas? Ilyas is in Scotland, and he says he really loves reading. And really wants to be a writer. What advice do you give to him about your journey?
Firstly, yes, I was told this. Firstly, read lots and live. Make sure you live, because what I mean by that is get as much experience as you can, right? I decided in my 20s to I'd read a lot about Hemingway, so I wanted to learn about war. Let's say, how does it feel to be in war? So I went to, when I was in Syria, I decided, 2006 war happened. I'm not encouraging this, but I'm just saying this is what I did, right? Because I wanted to be a writer. So how does it feel to be in war? So I went during 2006. There was a conflict in Lebanon right next door to me, and I thought it was a few hours away. So I decided I want to see this. How am I going to write about this? It's about widening your imagination. What you have now, you have got great writers with a beautiful form, but because they haven't lived, they don't have an experience of the human soul, as it were. And your job as a writer is really to unpack that, and you can only do that by living. So that means, if you're going to talk about love and you've never loved, how are you going to write about that? If that makes sense, how are you going to convey that? So what I mean by that is you need to live. Right, and this is what makes for great writing, great poetry, or any of these things. So make sure you do that. If that means traveling, make sure you do that. That's one thing I'd advise, because what you've got some beautiful writers now, 23, 22, that write wonderfully well. But you read that writing, you realize that this is the human experience isn't there because he hasn't lived. So make sure you do that.
And it's not just been popular, the book, here in the UK, but across Europe and around the world. It's been phenomenal.
Look, I don't know if it's how popular it's been, but it has had pickup from. Yeah. I've had phone calls from Australia. I've had phone calls from America. People have picked up on it, and they seem to be, being very. My DMs that I've had, they've been very, very positive about it. So I'm happy that way, for sure. Just wanted to go back. You said about the advice that I would give to journalists or British Muslims that want to be journalists. I would just say, you've got two hands, you grab it, you do it. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't challenges, but whatever you do, don't make yourself the victim, right? Don't be a victim. In other words, that don't feel, there is a ceiling that's no one's going to let me in. No, you take it. You be the underdog and you fight through it. That's the attitude you have. Forget resentment. Always remember that there are some kids in West Africa or South Asia that don't have your opportunities, that are looking at you thinking, hang on, if I was in your shoes, I'd show you what I can do. So you might have challenges because there are minority, there are many people in minorities who aren't in the media. But if you like something, you do it and you take it. Don't allow yourself to fall into that mentality, because I think in our day and age we have this tendency to kind of make ourselves victims, and we empower ourselves by saying, "I'm not a victim. I'm going to punch through it. I'm going to do it." That's what I'd advise anyone who wants to go into journalism, because you need to have that attitude, because that's going to get you the story, and that's going to make you push through when you're hitting obstacles. If that makes sense.
It does really make sense, and I would love to probably sit here all night and talk to you, Tam, but we're reaching the end of our time together. I just wanted to ask you one final question. What does the future hold? What's next?
I wish I could tell you. What the future, what I wish for the future to hold is that everyone who's listening goes and buys one of these books, one of my books, reads, and gets in touch with me. That would be great. Honestly, that would be great, and I'd be privileged if you guys do that. So. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm really glad we got there in the end. Best wishes for whatever you do, and Allah protect you always.
Thank you very much, and likewise. Thank you
so much. That was the award-winning journalist and author Tam Hussain joining us live from London. The book is titled The Darkness Inside. It's available now in bookstores across the country and around the world. So wherever you are watching it, go and get the book. It's called The Darkness Inside. Have a read of it, and then share your review with me, with British Muslim TV, but more importantly, let Tam know how you found the book. I have ordered the book, waiting for it to arrive, and certainly would want to read it. And it's really true. One of the things that I take away from the conversation just had with Tam, it'd be interesting to get your conversation, is the sense that since the mobile phones and electronic equipment, we've lost the desire and the passion for reading. And I used to read lots, and in recent years I've not been able to read, and maybe that's what I need to do. Right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Organ Donation Week, which is happening next week, and we'll be joined by the NHS Director, a non-executive director, Mahmoud Nawaz, will be joining us with his personal story. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq. Really fascinating conversation with just before the break with Tam Hussain. As I said, the book is called The Darkness Inside, and it's available in bookstores now, and a variety of bookstores, and you can get that sorted. Right, so we're in the final segment, actually. We want to talk to you about our final story and guest. Next week is National Organ Donation Week. It was supposed to be this week, but because of the sad death of Her Majesty the Queen, it was paused, and it's now happening next week. It's a chance to promote the benefits of being an organ donor and help save lives. Now, did you know that there is a shortage of organ donation amongst ethnic minority communities? If you need an organ, the wait is longer, and you're more likely to die. Becoming an organ donor can be confusing, but it actually saves lives. And whilst we're not focusing on what the Sharia says about organ donation in this segment, I've asked my dear Mufti Yusuf Akudi to answer in his program, Ask the Alim, tomorrow, about what does the Sharia say about organ donation. And so please, you can watch that. I think he's on air at 7:30 tomorrow. Here on British Muslim TV, and he will pick up that. I've personally asked him to focus on that. Tonight we're going to focus on the personal story. And, okay, so the personal story, well, that's what we're going to focus on. Now, Mahmoud Nawaz was happily married to Sharon in 2002. In 2004, they were looking forward to building their life together when she collapsed in the shower and would go on to sadly pass away. It's a really fascinating scary story, and it really makes you think about how short life is. But I'm pleased to say Mahmoud Nawaz, he's a non-executive director of Yorkshire NHS, Mid Yorkshire NHS, and he's really an advocate, a champion for organ donation. And I'm pleased to say he joins us live on British Muslim TV from just up the road here in Wakefield. Mahmoud, assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the program. Okay, well, we'll I promise you connect to Mahmoud. He is here. We'll come to him in a second. But as we said, organ donation is something which the rules have now changed. Whereas before you had to opt in to donate your organs, now you have to opt out. Not many people know that. Still, there is a safeguard in place in regards to families also being given an opportunity to influence the decision if the person who is not going to live hasn't made a decision to opt out or opt in. So the rules were changed, and there has been an uptick, and lots of families would have experienced this. I've experienced it with my nephew, who was in need of not just a liver transplant, but a kidney transplant. And what a difficult journey it was for him and his family. But alhamdulillah, he got through it when a donor was found. So let's talk to Mahmoud Nawaz. He's joining us from here in Wakefield. Mahmoud, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the program, my friend.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me.
It's really good to have this conversation. Let's start at the top. First of all, tell us about Sharon. What was she like?
Oh, she was a lovely person. She cared a lot for others. She cared a lot for children. People that met her felt that they'd known her for ages, really. And you know, a real mark of her, not just the organ donation, but she was a regular blood donor as well. And she was O negative, so the most valuable type of blood because it's universal. And she gave blood regularly as well. But it's just the mark of the person, really.
Yeah, that's really important. As I said, she collapsed in the shower one morning, was taken to hospital, but you were told by the doctors that she would not survive. How did the conversation about organ donation start with the health professionals when they were telling you that news that she was sadly not going to survive?
Yeah, so she'd collapsed in the shower, as you said, and you know, my natural reaction was that she'd fainted. I mean, what else do you think? And I rang 999. The ambulance came really quickly, 7 or 8 minutes, really quick, and they tried to revive her there and said we need to go into Bradford Royal Infirmary to try and help her through accident and emergency. Came there, waited for ages in the waiting room, and then they came to bring me in to say, look, we're really sorry, there's nothing we can now do for her. Have you considered organ donation before? And that's how it was first introduced to me. And it was something I was able to say yes to straight away because I was very, very lucky that she'd actually talked to me about her wishes. So I knew what she wanted. So I said yes. And that's when I got introduced to the specialist nurse. So what happens in hospitals now is that there are actually trained professionals to have this conversation and to help you with that journey. And I got introduced to Sharon, my specialist nurse, and from there on, that was the person that held my hand through the process.
Yeah, and through that journey, and really important that you had that conversation with Sharon. I'm assuming it was a mutual conversation in that you also expressed your choices as well. Did you ever hear back about how many lives Sharon saved and by her organs being used?
Absolutely. And just on your last point around having the conversation, it is vital because families are consulted. It was down to me to say yes for what she wanted. And if I didn't know what she wanted, I could well have said no. And I therefore feel she protected me by making that decision for me. In the middle of grief, when you've just lost someone suddenly and tragically in the way that you need to for organ donation to be possible, the last thing you want to have to do is make a big decision like organ donation. And she protected me by making that decision for me. So I didn't have to deal with that on top of what I was going through. But what happened was 4 lives were saved, including a little boy of 1.5 who wouldn't have made it to 2 without part of Sharon's liver. And he had his operation at Leeds Teaching Hospitals to save his life.
That's just really fascinating. It can at times be confusing about the process. We know now there's an opt-in rather than an opt-out. Just very simply, what's the process?
Yeah, so the law did change in May 2020, but essentially it's the same actions for everyone. So before, if you said, yes, you want to be an organ donor, then that's what would happen. If you said, no, you didn't want to be an organ donor, then that is also what would happen. Your wishes would be fulfilled. but the law relates to the people that haven't made a yes or a no decision. And where you haven't recorded a decision on the organ donor register and your family don't know what you would want, before the law changed, there was an assumption that you didn't want this to proceed. And now after the law changed, there's an assumption that you do want that to proceed. But irrespective of all of that, the family are asked. So if the family say no, it doesn't happen. And so it's still exactly the same things that you need to do. Make an informed decision, tell your family because they'll be consulted, and record your decision on the organ donor register. That was key before and it's still key now. All that's happened is your start point really for where you assume your decision to be, subject to the family agreeing to that.
Yeah, that's really important. Now, you've become a beacon for advocating for organ donation. What drives you to do this important work?
Oh, for me, this is her legacy. So she didn't just save the 4 lives that she saved when she died and donated her organs. Her stories inspired so many people to consider organ donation. And I feel very lucky in the sense that by being able to talk to people about the experience she went through and I've been through, as well as her family making that decision, it's really helped people connect to a very personal story. And you know, I'm immensely proud that she saved 4 lives, and that little boy that had the chance of life. I'm a dad now. I've got a 9-year-old girl, and when my daughter was 1.5, all I could do was just look at her and think, if she needed a transplant, I would be so incredibly grateful for someone making a decision like we did to donate Sharon's organs to give someone the chance of life. And that for me is what drives me, the ability to connect to people, to make people think that this could happen to them. They could be in a position where they could save lives, or it could happen to them. They could be in a position where they need a transplant. And in fact, you're more likely to need a transplant than to be an organ donor. And we'd all want to receive an organ if that would save our life, but there can only be done donation if there is an organ donor. So it's just really important to share the story. And I'm lucky that I'm able to share my story and connect with people and encourage them to have that informed decision. It's not about please say yes. It's about make your informed decision and let your family know what that decision is going to be.
Yeah. And as you reflect back on the years since Sharon's sad passing, how do you assess all that you've achieved?
Oh, it's really tricky. I mean, you do what you can to make a difference, but genuinely, if just one person has made a decision to have that conversation that's led to someone's life being saved, that's worth it.
Yeah, well, and I really love your poster at the back of your says one day it could be someone you know or love, or even you in need of a transplant. And as I said earlier, it's affected my family in terms of my nephew. My sister's son has been through this journey, and he was fortunate in he was able to get a liver transplant, but he waited a couple of years for that, and then had to have a kidney transplant as well. But his father was a good match. We don't seem to have that conversation. I know we're going to take a quick break, but on the whole, you know, the NHS has changed, and it now understands the importance of having those informed conversations with patients to increase take-up.
Absolutely, and you know, having culturally sensitive conversations with all of our communities is really, really vital. And I think the NHS got a lot better at doing exactly that.
We're going to explore this more. I know you're going to stay with me, Mahmoud. We're going to talk, as I said, about the personal journey and what the NHS says, because Mahmoud works in the NHS. If you want to know what Islam says, because neither of us are scholars, please tune in tomorrow. This will be, obviously, if you're watching this on the catch-up, you can catch it on the Facebook page of British Muslim TV, where we will give you a clip of Mufti Akudi answering this about organ donation. So you'll be able to find out what the Islamic principle is. And it is very clear that it is allowed. It's not against the Sharia to do this. But that's my view of talking to scholars. Mufti Akudi is going to cover that. Keep an eye on the social media. When we come back, we'll continue this important conversation with Mahmoud Nawaz, who's a non-executive director for the NHS here in mid-Yorkshire. He's joining us live from Wakefield. We'll take a break. We'll be back very shortly. Don't be going anywhere. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq. And my special guest this week in the final segment of the programme is Mahmoud Nawaz. He's a non-executive director for Mid Yorkshire NHS. He's an advocate, champion for organ donation, and he's joining us live from just up the road here in Wakefield. Let's open the line and take some of your calls, 01924 231 083. Mahmoud, tell us a bit about Organ Donation Week. It was supposed to be last week, National Organ Donation Week here in the UK, but obviously with the sad death of Her Majesty the Queen, it was moved to this coming week, the 26th of September. Tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, that's right, Mohammed. So it should have started on Monday, but for obvious reasons that got delayed. So it'll start now on Monday, the 26th of September, and run for a week, so Monday to Sunday. And it's just a national week of advocacy for organ donation. So around the country, there'll be some national events and press releases. So you'll see a lot in the media. You'll see some stuff on TV as well, but also locally in each hospitals trust area, there'll be local initiatives going on. So for example, here in Wakefield, we'll be lighting up Wakefield Town Hall pink all week and flying the organ donation flag, and our 3 hospital buildings in Mid Yorkshire, so that's Pinderfields in Wakefield, Pontefract and Dewsbury, will also turn pink and fly the flag. To try and drive awareness of organ donation and to encourage people to have that conversation with their family so that they're clear on what their wishes are.
Yeah, and then actually recording that on the NHS, you can do that on the app, NHS app as well?
That's absolutely right. So you can either go to the website, which is organdonation.nhs.uk, and that's really useful, not just to record your decision, but also to find out loads of information, including about issues relating to religion, for example. There's some really good materials on there to explain whether you're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, doesn't matter. There's a page there that will explain the position really, really clearly. But as you say, you can also do it, and probably the easiest way to do it is on the NHS app, and under the Your Health tab at the bottom, you can not just record your decision, you can also check your decision. So you can see what you've already done, and you can change your decision at any time, both in terms of a yes or a no, but also which organs you would like to donate. So it's a fluid thing, and you can update it and change it at any point.
That's really good. Now, you were involved in the British transplant. Sorry, let me put my teeth back in. Sorry, Mahmoud. The British Transplant Games, which happened recently in Leeds. Tell us, what is it all about, and what did you do?
Yeah, so I was really privileged to be involved on the board of the games coming to Leeds, and actually it's my first British Transplant Games I've attended. But what it's about is it's a celebration of life. It brings together people that have had a transplant, whether they're adults or children, and it is pretty amazing to see really young children competing when they've had a life-changing transplant. Quite recently as well. So it's a magical celebration of people really trying, encouraging transplant patients to be active, which is really important for their recovery. But it also brings together the whole organ donation community. So whether that's people who've received a transplant, people who are donor families like myself who've had a loved one die and donate organs, and all the people involved working in transplantation, whether that's on the donor side or the transplant side, all coming together as one community. And it was just an incredible celebration of the gift of life. And it was topped off on the Sunday. It was run from the 28th to the 31st of July in Leeds, and it was topped off on the last day, on the Sunday, with the Yorkshire Air Ambulance, the yellow air ambulance helicopter landing at the John Charles Centre and carrying in a special edition large Yorkshire organ donation card that we've had commissioned for the games as well, just to really get people across all communities to just have that conversation and use the organ donor card as a trigger to have that conversation with your family. Yeah,
that's really, really important. Now, we were talking earlier on about the low take-up of organ donation volunteers within the Muslim community and the wider ethnic minority communities. What does the What does the facts, if you like, the statistics tell us?
Yeah, it's a real health inequality, and something I'm really passionate about more generally. So so if you're from an ethnic minority, because of issues like higher prevalence of diabetes or hypertension, we as a community or a set of communities from ethnic minorities are twice as likely to need a transplant. So we'll be on the transplant waiting list twice as much as non-ethnic minority populations. But our donation, so from deceased donation, like for my wife, is half as much. So we're twice as likely to need and half as likely to donate, and therefore you wait a lot longer because you really need an ethnicity match for the organs to have the best chance of being accepted by the body. And so you wait a lot longer, and therefore, sadly, you're at greater risk of dying. So it's a real challenge that we've got to encourage people to have that conversation, because our need is greater and our willingness is lower. So that's our challenge. There is also living donation as well. So you're able, if you have a close family member that needs a kidney, for example, 3/4 of the transplant waiting list.
I was just telling you earlier on about my nephew. His father was a match, and so his father gave him one kidney.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's in our communities as well. It's a much higher prevalence of living donation. But one of the new schemes that NHS Blood and Transplant have introduced is an ability, if you are not a match. So if you're a father and you want to donate to your son, for example, but you're not a match, that you can do a sort of triangular swap, so that you can donate your kidney to someone else who needs one in exchange for someone donating the right match for your loved one, so that you can actually encourage living donation even where there isn't a match. And that's a new scheme that will start to encourage living donation in a much stronger way. And again, organdonation.nhs.uk is a good place to find out more about that. But a combination of encouraging more deceased donation and conversations about organ donation upon your death, and understanding more about living donation, are really the key to being able to tackle this health inequality where our communities are waiting far too long for a life-changing transplant.
Now, what more can the NHS do? We talked about the conversations within communities, but what can the NHS do that isn't doing?
Yes, absolutely. So what's happened over the last 2-3 years, which I think has been really good, is much more focus on engaging with community leaders and religious leaders. So as I mentioned, on the organdonation.nhs.uk website, there's some really good resources on faith. So, for example, within the Muslim community, Mufti Mohammed Zubair Butt, who, if you haven't got on your program, might be worth doing, actually, Mohammed. But he's one of the leading scholars on organ donation within the UK, and he's written a fatwa, which is again available to read on the organdonation.nhs.uk website, which, as you've just said, explains why it is permissible for organ donation within Islam, and lays out the conditions under which it's permissible, which is all about consent. So talking to your family and making an informed decision, and about making a real difference to the recipient's life. So is it going to be life-changing or life-saving by making this donation? And obviously organ donation is absolutely those things, really. And the other thing that's happened quite well over the last couple of years is a scheme called the Community Investment Scheme. And there, local community groups and charities are encouraged to bid for funds to support local messages to local communities from the right messengers as well. So not dissimilar to the great success the NHS had in engaging well on the COVID vaccination by having the communities actually talk about this themselves. But a great example of that is there's a wonderful website that's been built, funded by this scheme, called organdonationinislam.com. And what that has set out to do is bring together all the resources on what you need to know as a Muslim about organ donation to help you make that informed decision. So that's another great resource, but which the NHS has funded in order to engage with more diverse communities.
I'm going to ask you one final question because we're coming to the end of our program. Somebody on Facebook is saying they've said they've heard that some people, it's certainly a rumor, that that the NHS take people's organs without the family permission. That's false, isn't it?
That's absolutely false. So I'll reiterate again. The only way that organ donation is permissible is if you yourself have made a decision to be a donor, and even if you have made a decision and said yes and put that on the organ donor register, but your family then say no because they haven't consented, that organ donation will not go ahead. There'll be a conversation to say, look, but they said yes here, and why are you saying no? But unless all parties are agreeing, it won't go ahead. So it is absolutely false that the government or the NHS or anyone is just going to take your organs. And there's been a lot of myths about the law change, but all it's doing is starting from a position of saying, if you haven't opted out and you haven't said yes or no, let's assume to start with that you are in favour of organ donation, and then the conversation with the family is there any reason why you don't want this to proceed? And if the family says no, it won't happen.
Well, thank you so much for being my special guest this evening, Mahmood. Looking forward to welcoming you back, and congratulations on all the work that you do. Much love.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. That was Mahmood Nawaz joining us live from just up the road here in Wakefield and talking about organ donation. As we said, Mufti Yakudi will be looking at this on Ask the Alim in programmes here on British Muslim TV, so keep an eye on that. And then, inshallah, we'll make sure that we publish that on our social media so that you can learn more about that. But also, there is those fatwas, so get more information on that. It's very, very important when the need is so, so important. I want to say thank you so much to my guest this week. We've reached the end of another programme. As I said, thank you to Iqbal Bana, Dr. Musharraf Hussain, Tam Hussain, and Mahmood Nawaz. We'll be back next week on Wednesday at 8:30. And did you know it's our 100th I keep saying anniversary, but it's not our 100th anniversary because that would be it's our 100th episode here on British Muslim TV. And all of it wouldn't be possible without you. So we'll celebrate it next week. I don't know, we might get some balloons and some cake. I don't know. Let's see. If you've got any ideas, drop us a message, British Muslim TV. From me, James, and the whole team here at British Muslim TV, thank you so much for joining us. I wish you well. Have a great weekend. And we'll see you next week at the same time. Assalamu alaikum.